Can you tell us, from your management perspective in television news for so many years, how has TV news changed since you've been in the business, and where do you think it's headed in the future?
I think from my beginnings in the late 70s till recently, I think that the arc of television news has become marketing swallowed the product. And I think that one of the things that we have to be on guard about in the United States is doing things strictly for ratings. And because of the system we have into place, that is, the genie has been let out of the bottle, and you see an extremely heavy emphasis on marketing. And this is coming from somebody who has been doing it for 25 years. That's the biggest difference. The second biggest one, I think, is the immediacy of electronic media that has allowed information to come into the station so quickly. And because of competitive pressures, there's no time to analyze the information coming in the door. So you don't get vetted information, or you have to really, really have a lot of safeguards into place so that incorrect information doesn't get out onto the air, even though it's available right in front of you.
What are some of the things that you see today? I mean, news is changing rapidly. Just in these last few years, what are some of the things you've observed on the changes that have occurred?
Well, the internet is like another station, and it adds a whole other layer of responsibility and workload to the people generating it, and the people promoting it, and the people supporting it technologically. And I think that that has created such a time crunch for the people creating the product. And that, I think, creates, ultimately hurts the product.
When we're talking about internet and how news has become so mobile now, can you explain how the audience, the television audience, really is shrinking, and the internet use of TV news is really expanding, exploding?
The one thing that they're not making more of is time. And people choose what they're going to do with that finite resource. And as additional choices arise for investing that finite time, we find the time devoted to over-the-air television being whittled away at. And when I started in television, there was just the 4 networks, maybe a couple of down-on-their-luck independents running horror movies, and I Love Lucy. And then came HBO and ESPN, and that further fragmented the viewing time. Then there came additional networks like Discovery and A&E and all the sub-networks underneath them, additionally sliced up time into smaller and smaller slices of availability that you have to devote your waking hours to. And then the internet came in and piled on and created yet another diversion, yet another choice. And I think that television broadcasters are fighting that battle for time. And they're trying to become and remain the choice for your investment of time.
Let's talk about ratings. I mean, the way the stations base their revenue is how ratings are really the driving force on what goes into the newscast, how it's being promoted. Can you give our audience in Sweden a perspective of an insight on how ratings play such a key role in the whole management of a television station, especially when it comes to news?
Ratings are the driver of revenue. And revenue is why TV stations, primarily, especially these days, exist. And we would make decisions across the board, particularly programming choices, depending upon what we anticipated the ratings could be. Even to the point of ridiculous, in that we would buy syndicated programming that we weren't even going to be able to air until it came off the network. Like the last year of Seinfeld, we were negotiating to be able to run it in syndication. And we had to make so many assumptions about what kind of ratings it would generate, and therefore what revenue it would generate, and therefore what we could afford to bid on the show. 4 years out. And, but the ratings and what we thought the ratings would be were a critical part of that decision. It's the same way when we launch a newscast. We would analyze the time period, how many people were available to watch, what they were watching, how many would start watching because they're somebody that we might have taken off the noon newscast was doing the morning newscast, and they'd bring their viewers with them. And we decide, all right, well, that might do a 2 rating, and therefore with 16 commercials, that might represent $10,000 a week, and it's going to cost us $11,000 a week to actually staff it. And so you'd have to do this checks and balances continually to figure out what was worth the investment.
Not only are ratings being used, of course, to decide what kind of programs the station will air, but how do the ratings affect the anchors and the reporters?
Well, the anchors and reporters, I think this is one of the big changes that's occurred over the last 30 years. The anchors and reporters have had to get comfortable with the marketing of the product. And for example, this is Ann Peterson, Eyewitness News. And they are regularly teasing, which I assume is something alien in the Swedish environment. They're continually teasing the upcoming stories. And that is how they retain the viewership so they can continue making money by driving the ratings. And it is an art form which I don't believe reporters and anchors had developed until the last 15, 20 years. When I started, it wasn't a factor. When we did a 30-second promotional announcement in the middle of our CBS programming, it essentially was a miniature newscast. And at the end of it, we'd say, details at 10. Now, we say, at 10 o'clock, you've got to see this, but we don't show them. We see a little piece of it. And is your water, you think that water is safe? We'll tell you otherwise tonight at 10. Weather person comes on and say, are changes ahead for the Kansas City area and weather? Are your flowers safe? We'll tell you tonight at 10. And that permeates the product. And that's a huge change.
What does management look for when anchors, when you have an anchor opening? What is management looking for in their anchors? Can you share with us from your experience?
What you begin with is you look at people's, and in those days, demo tapes. Nowadays, it's all on the internet. But we would look at their presentation. And if we liked their presentation and felt that they came off the screen at us, they had presence on camera, which is a difficult thing to describe, but if they had presence on camera, we would then call the station where they worked or their competitors and say, what do you think about this guy? Because we're thinking about hiring him. And then we look up the ratings for the station that person's currently at, and we find out when did he start, what newscast was he on, and what was there any increase in the ratings in his tenure. All right, so we have that information. Then we typically would show the videotape to a group of people, usually sales folks or engineers or somebody in the building. And in my case, I was lucky enough to work for a manager who actually would invite opinions. Many managers would not. They just work strictly with the consultants. And then when we showed it to the lay people, we would pretty much show them the tape for about 3 or 4 seconds. And we'd stop it. And we'd say, what do you think? And they said, well, that was too quick. That's all they're going to get when they come on the air is about 4 seconds of attention as people go like this with their remotes. We want, ideally, the person that captures people's attention in seconds. And we never always attained that goal, but that was our goal, is to find people that just captivated the viewer.
Where do you see television news going in the future here in the United States?
I don't think news is going to go away. I think that as technology continues to grow, the engine that generates news will continue to go on down the road. I think it's just a question of how it's delivered. It's like we're not saying television anymore, we're saying video, because video is platform independent. And what TV stations are, because they already have the infrastructure and the legacy of creating content that is actually vetted and journalistically sound by and large, they will just continue to distribute their content in different mediums and find ways to make money in those different mediums. Right now, that's still difficult because the infrastructure for making money is based upon the past. It's based upon ratings, diaries, and the safe choice for advertising.
My last question, let's talk about what is good. Let's do a compare and contrast.
Mm-hmm.
What would you consider some of the great things that we are doing in America in television news? And concurrently, what are some of the things that we're doing really bad, that we have regressed in TV news? First, the good.
The good. I think that, and actually I think it was more of a case in the past, but when there was a national news conscience, that was by and large very independent and they made every attempt to follow the traditions of Edward R. Murrow back in the 50s to set up a fair and balanced, I hate to use that phrase, but a journalistically sound product. And relatively few outlets were available, and they were, Huntley Brinkley, Walter Cronkite, Roger Mudd, those folks were the arbiters of what actually happened that was worthy of you knowing, even if you didn't ask for it. Here's what you need to know. That has changed, and I think to the detriment of the country to a degree. There's still, local newscasts or national newscasts still have big media share of mind, but nothing like they used to have. And I think we're giving something up by that. I think we're giving up a sense of unity as to what is going on in the country. Right now, you can pick your news product based upon your pre-existing biases, and that is entirely a marketing strategy, which works, unfortunately. And on cable networks in particular in the United States, that is a marketing tool. It's a branding tool. It's not necessarily about journalism. It's about the marketing under that banner of conservatism or liberalism or pick your persuasion. And I think and it's fragmented the audience as people that used to watch Walter Cronkite or whoever are now looking to the product that already fits their pre-existing dispositions. And I think that has fragmented the national experience.
The pendulum has really changed. We used to be so conservative during the Walter Cronkite era of broadcasting. Mm-hmm. And it seems like now anything goes. What you say, what you show, mm-hmm. the philosophy of the station or network, the philosophy of the presenter, whether it be a reporter or anchor. Anything goes, and it's become so much more liberal in that respect.
It's all driven by ratings. It's all driven by ratings. If they could get away with a beheading on the air and it would do a 25 rating, they'd do it. But they can't get away with it. I think that because of ratings and because of the system set up in the United States where revenue comes from a share from primarily for over-the-air television in particular, comes from strictly how many people watch the show, that it has lowered it has lowered the quality of what we're putting out in front of them just so we can get them to tune in. And it works, and it's a sad statement about the human condition that it would work, but it works with some people, enough to make the ratings go up a tick and self-propagate more of the same.
News was for news sake. Now it seems like news is swinging to entertainment.
News is entertainment built on an essential platform of journalism. And in the past, it was strictly journalism, and it was left alone as a lost leader as a way to serve the community and to justify the government giving you a license to broadcast in your market. And that was like being given the keys to the bank in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, to be able to dominate the media message over the air in a city was a license to print money. But then, in the 70s, consultants started getting involved with telling the stations what had worked in Spokane or what had worked in New York that might be able to squeeze a little money out of this newscast loss leader thing you're doing. And the people running the stations, of course, their performance is based upon how much revenue they bring in. So they said, yeah, let's try that. And you began the era of the slippery slope of marketing and of marketing the product and doing more and more slowly. Entertainment started to come in to the point where I don't know where the tipping point was, but it went from being a bland recitation of the news to a much more pandering kind of a presentation.
Do you think that we have really diluted our authenticity, our journalistic integrity, and really misused our responsibility as journalists with the type of news that we're now putting on the air?
I think a large amount of that has happened. And I think that it's because of the pressures of revenue and the competitive nature of the business. I know that we made a lot of decisions based upon the competitive nature and trying to get a leg up on the competition and make a few bucks in the process. We, however, tried to make sure we didn't cross over a certain line where we were doing things that we would not want our family to see us put on the air, or selling news coverage, or doing things that we felt were a misuse of the airwaves. And that has changed, I think. I'm not quite sure how to articulate it, but I think that the lowest common denominator issue has seeped further and further into the newscast.
What would you recommend to our Swedish friends in broadcasting, what they should not do, what they should not emulate in America, that they should?
That's a good question.
It's not about what they are doing right or wrong, but just a little advice. Whatever you do when you're looking at your product and when you're looking at what you're trying to accomplish as a news station, just do one thing, whatever that is. Don't try to do something that we're doing bad in America.
I think that one thing we have forgotten, and an important thing, is that television is a guest in the home. Act like one. And if you do that, that covers a lot of the issues with broadcasting, I believe, is remember you are an invited guest. People chose to watch you. And they expect certain behavior out of you. They're not going to invite you over for dinner, and then you're going to start dancing on the table and throwing things around. That's not who they invited into their living room. They invited the person they know. And I think that speaks to one of the things that American audiences have come to be used to, is a relationship with the person relating the news. And I think that is an important component of broadcasting, is to be able to feel the people on the screen are friends. And I think that there is something to be said for that in any video, pictures and sound presentation. It's about the people, it's storytelling. And when you put people on the air, so much of the emotion is in the face and in the eyes. And I would suggest keep telling stories about people and how the news affects them.